Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump rejects Iran's response to US proposal to end war as totally unacceptable. Evacuation flights leave Spain after hantavirus outbreak on a luxury cruise ship. And Israeli strikes kill 3 people in Gaza, putting a test on the fragile ceasefire. First, this morning, US President Donald Trump has rejected Iran's response to a proposal aimed at ending the ongoing conflict between the two countries. The rejection follows a counter-proposal from Tehran that included demands for sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and financial compensation. Meanwhile, Israel still maintains that any agreement must ensure the removal of Iran's enriched uranium.
The latest attempt to end the conflict between Washington and Tehran has reached a deadlock. On Sunday, US President Donald Trump rejected a response from Iran delivered through Pakistani mediators, signaling that the current terms are insufficient for a US agreement. Writing on social media, the president stated he had reviewed the response from Iranian representatives and found it totally unacceptable. The Iranian proposal, as reported by state media, sought several key concessions in exchange for peace. Tehran is demanding full sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, the lifting of all US sanctions, and financial compensation for damages incurred during the recent escalation. Iranian sources, cited by the Tasnim news agency, claim their position is based on the rights of the Iranian people and suggest that the US proposal required what they termed submission to excessive demands. Adding to the complexity is the position of Israel. In an interview with CBS News, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized that any lasting deal must address Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Netanyahu stated that the war is not over as long as Iran possesses enriched uranium.
It accomplished a great deal, but it's not over because there's still nuclear material, enriched uranium, that has to be taken out of Iran. There's still enrichment sites that have to be dismantled. There are still proxies that Iran supports. There are ballistic missiles that they still want to produce. Now, we've degraded a lot of it, but all of that is still there, and there's work to be done.
The current situation follows military engagements in February, which led to a Pakistani-mediated ceasefire in April. While President Trump has extended this truce without a fixed deadline, a formal peace treaty has not been signed. Mediators in Pakistan continue to facilitate communication between the two sides, though no timeline for further talks has been established.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to The Guardian, and we stick with the main story this morning in regards to what Trump calls Iran's response to peace plan totally unacceptable, as the ceasefire phrase. Now, we know from that report that President Donald Trump has rejected Iran's response to US proposals to end the war. Now, why is this happening? Trump said that Iran's reply was totally unacceptable, while Tehran called for an immediate end to fighting, the US naval blockade to be removed, and any further attacks to stop. Last week, we know that Trump repeated that the war in Iran will be over quickly. But due to his recent comments, oil prices have already seen an increase since then. Energy prices have swung wildly since the start of the conflict, while Brent crude has risen back above $100 a barrel since the ceasefire came into effect on the 8th of April. Now, Trump says that the war could end quickly, but Netanyahu is still insisting that Iran's enriched uranium stockpile must be removed, and President Masoud Pezeshkian of Iran says dialogue will not amount to surrender, meaning that Iran is open to talks. However, they are not going to surrender their sovereignty or anything that they feel is beyond their sovereign state. So that's what is currently leading on today's papers. Now let's go to the next story, which is also making headlines this morning, and that's on the BBC, and that's in relation to the hantavirus. Now, French national shows symptoms on return from the hantavirus hantavirus-hit ship. Now, we know that this passenger was exposed on the ship to the outbreak and has shown symptoms while being repatriated to France. Now, passengers have been placed in strict isolation as more than 90 tourists are repatriated from the ship after 3 deaths and 2 confirmed hantavirus cases. Now, just a reminder of how this all happened. Hantavirus is a group of viruses carried by rodents, and it can be found in some areas of Europe, Africa and Asia. Now, symptoms can include a fever, extreme fatigue, muscle aches, stomach pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea or shortness of breath. And all these symptoms normally come up 2 weeks after the individual may have caught the actual virus. There is no available vaccine or specific antiviral treatment for the hantavirus, which is making it even more of an issue for those who are now leaving the cruise ship and heading home to their respective countries and will be placed in isolation during that particular time to limit any further transmission of the infection. Now, passengers and crew from 22 countries in total are being moved home in stages, with quarantines and monitoring in place in Spain, the UK, the Netherlands, the US and Turkish citizens and Irish citizens as well, are all making their way home from this particular cruise ship, which has been going around parts of the world and is now returning back since the deaths were confirmed and a number of individuals caught the actual virus on board of the ship. Okay, now we will turn over to our next story making headlines this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera. That's in relation to Trump to discuss Iran with Xi Jinping during China visit. That's what officials say. Now, Donald Trump is due in Beijing on Wednesday this week. And arrives in the evening for talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the Iran war and a number of other issues as well. Now, this would be his first trip to China since 2017. However, we know that the two have been liaising together in regards to a number of different things, especially when it comes to trade. Now, the White House says the trip is symbolic and very important and is aimed at rebalancing ties with China after the postponement in March when they were due to meet. But because of the war with Iran, the US had to postpone that as well. Now, fresh US accusations that Beijing has helped fund Tehran is also swirling around. So it's something that I'm sure the two will be talking about. And lastly, on this topic is that the two leaders will hold their first face-to-face talks in more than 6 months as they try to steady the strained ties. And as I mentioned, they will be looking and talking about trade issues as well as Iran. China is a partner, especially when it comes to oil with Iran. And because of the war there, they've also been directly impacted by a lack of oil running through the Strait of Hormuz to China. In relation to what's going on there. So these talks will be quite significant. I will definitely provide you with more of an update when we get more information. Now, Trump, we know, lands on the Wednesday evening. So on Thursday, there'll be more information coming out of that, of what's been going on that day. So the Thursday and the Friday, we'll get much more information in relation to how things are turning out between the two leaders. Now, let's turn over to another meeting that's taking place this week. And if we go to Deutsche Welle's website, and their headline today is Africa Summit in Kenya, France seeks new partners. Now, it's the Africa Forward Summit on Africa-France Partnerships for Innovation and Growth, which opens today at the University of Nairobi. Now, why might this be happening? Now, analysts actually say that Emmanuel Macron is using the Nairobi summit to signal a shift in France's-Africa strategy as Paris actually tries to rebuild influence beyond its current traditional Francophone allies and deepen ties with Anglophone partners. Now, we know that Macron and Kenyan President William Ruto are co-chairing talks on security, investment and green energy, while France uses the summit to show it wants a long-term role in Africa, despite anti-French sentiment in the Sahel. We know that Mali has definitely pushed France out in regards to partnerships and relationships with there. So France is trying to widen its scope within the continent of Africa and turning primarily to East Africa, which in regards to what I've just stated that it's a non-Francophone country, mostly English-speaking, but France is definitely trying to diverse its contacts and its relationships on the continent. And it's quite interesting that he's chosen Kenya. So we'll definitely bring you up to speed with any talks that come out or any agreements that come out of this particular discussion and the summit that is taking place, and whether or not a number of other countries will also want to partner with France in relation to what they're able to offer, in relation to how they're able to come together and work to reach common goals in their ongoing relationships with France and Africa and the number of nations within the continent. Okay, well, that's the press roundup for now. We're now going to go to a quick break, and when I return, I have more of the stories for this morning. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the rest of the global stories this morning. Now we turn to the hantavirus, and an international evacuation operation is underway following the hantavirus outbreak. Passengers and crew from more than 20 countries are now being flown home from Spain for quarantine and monitoring as health officials work to contain the spread of the virus.
Dozens of passengers and crew members have begun leaving the MV Hondius cruise ship docked off Tenerife following a hantavirus outbreak that has killed 3 people and infected several others. The vessel arrived in the Canary Islands carrying more than 140 people from 23 countries after spending days stranded off Cape Verde. Spanish authorities launched a large international evacuation effort with charter and government flights transporting passengers to countries including the United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, Turkey, Canada and the United States. British passengers were transferred to Arrow Park Hospital near Liverpool for an initial isolation period, while other countries introduced their own quarantine and testing measures. Spanish Health Minister Monica Garcia said nearly 100 passengers from 19 nationalities had already disembarked by Sunday evening. French authorities also confirmed that 1 passenger developed symptoms during a repatriation flight to Paris and was taken to hospital for testing. Officials say the outbreak involves the Andes strain of hantavirus, a rodent-borne virus found in parts of South America, and one of the few strains capable of limited person-to-person transmission. The World Health Organization has sought to calm fears of a wider outbreak, stressing that hantavirus does not spread in the same way as COVID-19.
This is not COVID. The average person does not need to be worried about hantavirus here in this setting. These folks are being managed very carefully, very deliberately by the Spanish authorities. They're getting off the ship, they're getting into small boats, they're being spaced apart in the buses so that there's no risk to one another, even if one were to become symptomatic. We know that none of them are symptomatic as they have been leaving the ship. They're going straight to their aircraft and they're being taken to their respective national jurisdictions.
The WHO says passengers were screened before disembarkation and transferred in controlled groups for repatriation flights to their home countries. Officials say international contact tracing and monitoring will continue throughout the incubation period, which can last up to 8 weeks. While authorities say the overall public risk remains low, contingency plans remain in place in case additional infections emerge after passengers return home.
Now turning to the war in Ukraine, and as fighting continues along the front line, Russian President Vladimir Putin says the conflict in Ukraine could be nearing an end, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signals Kyiv's openness to direct talks. Here's more.
War in Ukraine remains active despite renewed diplomatic signals and a temporary ceasefire between Moscow and Kyiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the conflict in Ukraine could be coming to an end, while signalling openness to talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky aimed at reaching a long-term peace agreement. Speaking to reporters in Moscow after Russia's Victory Day celebrations, Putin accused Western countries of fueling the war through NATO expansion and continued military support for Kyiv. He said Russia would be prepared to meet with Zelensky either in Moscow or in a third country, but only if discussions are focused on finalising a lasting peace deal. Putin also said Russia had proposed a prisoner exchange involving 500 captives, even before US President Donald Trump suggested broader ceasefire efforts, adding that Moscow had not yet received a response from Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine later agreed to a larger 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap as part of a 3-day ceasefire running through Monday. Despite the ceasefire, both sides accused each other of continued attacks. Russia's defense ministry claimed Ukrainian forces carried out thousands of ceasefire violations, including drone strikes and shelling. Ukraine, meanwhile, said Russian troops continued assaults along key frontline areas. Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia had refrained from large-scale missile and air attacks, but was still carrying out combat operations near the front line.
In other words, the Russian army is not observing the silence at the front and is not even particularly trying to. All our Ukrainian units are acting in a mirror-like manner, defending our positions exactly as required.
Zelensky also confirmed preparations for the planned prisoner exchange and said the United States was involved in guaranteeing implementation of the agreement.
The Kremlin says US envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner could travel to Russia for further talks on the war in Ukraine. Russian President aide Yuri Ushakov said Moscow and Washington remain in regular contact by phone, despite the US currently focusing more on the Middle East crisis. Ushakov also said negotiations would remain stalled unless Ukrainian forces withdraw from the Donbass region. The Defense Minister of Latvia, Andris Spruds, has resigned after 2 Ukrainian drones crossed into Latvia from Russia and struck oil storage facilities earlier this week. The decision was urged by Latvia's Prime Minister, who said the country's anti-drone response had been too slow. The incident has renewed security concerns across the Baltic region, with Latvia and Lithuania urging NATO to strengthen air defences near the Russian border. Hezbollah has launched 24 attacks against Israeli forces as deadly strikes across Lebanon kill at least 21 people, pushing the fragile ceasefire to the brink of collapse. The group claims its drones and missiles targeted Israeli command centers in response to truce violations. Meanwhile, Lebanese health officials report children are among the victims of the latest Israeli bombardment. The Israeli military says it intercepted several hostile targets, causing Hezbollah of breaching the agreement. Staying on this, Israeli airstrikes have again hit several locations across Gaza, resulting in multiple casualties and prompting fresh claims and counterclaims from both sides, despite a US-brokered ceasefire that remains under heavy strain.
Israeli strikes killed at least 3 Palestinians in Gaza on Sunday, including 2 Hamas-run police officers, according to health officials, in the midst of ongoing tensions despite a US-brokered ceasefire. Medics said another strike on the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza killed 1 person and wounded 2 others. The Israeli military said it had targeted 2 suspected militants approaching its forces. Separately, Palestinians in southern Gaza gathered around a wrecked vehicle after an Israeli airstrike hit Khan Yunis, killing the head of the city's criminal police force and his assistant, according to Gaza's Hamas-run Interior Ministry. The officials were identified as Wessam Abdel Hadi and his aide.
The fragile ceasefire the world thinks is in effect in the Gaza Strip. However, daily there is a repeated targeting and cowardly assassination incidents against our people in general. Since the start of this ceasefire, the strikes are still ongoing. Every day we lose children, we lose elders, we lose young people.
Later in the day, mourners carried the bodies of the 2 officers through the streets of Khan Yunis as grieving relatives and residents gathered to pay their final respects.
The police personnel are civilian members who serve the people, resolve problems between people, intervene to settle conflicts between people, but the occupation continues to target them.
The Israeli military said it struck Hamas elite fighters in southern Gaza, alleging they were preparing imminent attacks on its forces. The latest violence has once again exposed the fragility of the ceasefire that came into force in October 2025. Despite the agreement, strikes and clashes have continued across Gaza, with both Israel and Hamas accusing each other of violating the truce. According to local medics, at least 850 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire began. Israel says 4 of its soldiers have also been killed during the same period. Gaza health authorities say more than 72,500 Palestinians have been killed since the war erupted in October 2023, with civilians accounting for the majority of the deaths.
Now, the Palestinian International Marathon has returned this year after the war in Gaza forced major disruptions to public events and daily life. This year's race was held simultaneously in Bethlehem and Gaza for the first time in 3 years, with organisers saying it was meant to send a message of unity and resilience amid the ongoing conflict. Let's take a look.
The 10th Palestine International Marathon was held on Friday in the southern West Bank city of Bethlehem, alongside a parallel race in the Gaza Strip, marking the first time in 3 years that the event was staged simultaneously in both territories following the war in Gaza. Thousands of Palestinian and international runners took part in the marathon, which organisers said aimed to deliver a message of unity, resilience and determination amid ongoing hardships. Participants included professional athletes, amateur runners and people with disabilities.
The Palestine Sports Marathon is an annual event, but because of the war on Gaza, we have been separated from it for 3 years. The launch from Gaza, simultaneously with the launch from Bethlehem, unites the 2 parts of the homeland and sends a message to the world that Palestinians have the right to live in freedom and dignity.
Today, winning means everything to me. Despite the blockade, the famine, and losing my father and 4 brothers in the war, I participated with all my strength.
The marathon was organised by the Palestinian Olympic Committee in partnership with the Egyptian Committee for Gaza Relief and local groups. Organisers said more than 13,000 runners took part across all events, including over 2,500 in Gaza and around 1,000 international participants from 75 countries and regions.
Very impressive there. Now we turn to East Africa, and Kenyan President William Ruto and French President Emmanuel Macron have held talks in Nairobi during a state visit ahead of the Africa-France summit, which starts later today. Ruto said it is the first time the summit is to be held outside France or Francophone Africa, with Kenya positioning itself as a hub for renewed ties with Paris. Talks centred on trade, investment, climate and security as France seeks to reset ties with African partners in the middle of shifting global influence. Staying on the continent, a high-level UN meeting in Ethiopia has focused on how African economies can build resilience as global uncertainty continues to disrupt trade, investment and development. Let's take a look at this story.
African economies are under pressure from a more fragmented global environment. At a UN meeting in Addis Ababa, officials warned that geopolitical tensions, debt pressures and supply chain disruptions are slowing progress toward development goals.
These local challenges are unfolding against a complex global backdrop, marked by geopolitical tensions, conflicts, and economic fragmentation. This discord is disrupting trade, investment, and international cooperation, significantly containing the policy space and weakening collective actions.
Experts say Africa needs deeper trade links and more investment to build resilience.
Africa, it's 2 things. It's trade, it's investment. And then creating conditions for that to happen is what we are working on.
They also point to critical minerals as an opportunity for green industrialization, if countries can build stronger regional value chains instead of relying mainly on raw material exports.
We need to work together. We need to build up regional value chains in the critical mineral space so that we can use that also as an opportunity for green industrialization.
The meeting's message was that Africa's long-term resilience will depend on stronger cooperation across the continent.
Now we head over, and rescuers have recovered the body of an Indonesian woman who was caught in a volcanic eruption on Mount Dukono on Indonesia's remote island of Halmahera. 2 Singaporean hikers went missing and their bodies later found under volcanic debris near the crater rim, reportedly holding each other. Rescue teams said difficult terrain, heavy rain and continuing volcanic activity complicated recovery efforts. Around 150 rescuers and thermal drones were deployed in the search operation. Authorities said the volcano has continued erupting since Friday, sending ash high into the sky and forcing restrictions around the crater area. Now over to staying on East Asia. China posted stronger than expected trade figures in April, driven by a sharp rise in overseas demand. The latest data comes as global markets closely watch the economic impact of tensions in the Middle East.
China's exports grew faster than expected in April as overseas buyers rushed to secure supplies amid fears the Iran conflict could drive up global energy and transport costs. Customs data released on Saturday showed exports rose 14.1% year-on-year in US dollar terms, accelerating from 2.5% growth in March. Imports also remained strong, climbing 25.3% in April, while China's trade surplus widened to $84.8 billion from $51.13 billion a month earlier. Analysts said exporters have benefited from a wave of overseas orders as companies stockpile goods and components before potential cost increases linked to the Middle East conflict. Factory surveys last month showed new export orders reached their highest level in 2 years. Despite solid first-quarter economic growth of 5%, economists warned that prolonged geopolitical tensions and rising energy prices could weaken external demand in the months ahead, adding pressure to China's already sluggish consumer spending. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump is expected to visit China next week for talks with President Xi Jinping, with discussions likely to focus on trade, agriculture and aviation sectors.
Now let's head over to the song contest, which is making a lot of people wanting to get on their feet and find out exactly what's going on. The 70th Eurovision Song Contest is officially kicking off with all 35 competing countries stepping onto the turquoise carpet for the opening ceremony. A News' Katie Wilson is at the site in Vienna and preparing for the week start of a week-long music spectacle. Let's take a look.
Hello from Vienna. We are here ahead of the 70th anniversary of the Eurovision Song Contest, and the opening ceremony is about to take place right behind me here. All 35 competing countries are about to walk this turquoise carpet, marking the grand opening of this edition of Eurovision. But don't get me wrong, we might be calling this the opening ceremony, but these acts have been in Vienna the past week, rehearsing, practicing on the Eurovision stage, and of course the preparation for this has gone on for months. So this will mark the official opening. We're going to have a chat with as many actors as we can to find out how they're feeling ahead of this week-long spectacle. We have 2 semi-finals on Tuesday and Thursday, as well as the grand final on Saturday. Now, if you're looking out for Azerbaijan's entry, Jiva, she will be performing on Thursday. She'll be in second position, which is historically a bit of an unlucky position in Eurovision. So let's see if Jiva is able to turn things around. But I've been speaking to the act walking the turquoise carpet, so let's see how they're feeling ahead of Eurovision's grand opening.
And let's take a look at exactly what Katie was able to speak to at the turquoise stage. Let's take a look at that.
So what can we expect from your performance on Thursday, and what does it mean to represent Azerbaijan?
Okay, I expect best performance. I wish this. I want to touch everybody's heart and represent my country and Eurovision. I'm very proud of this. It's very cool.
And what about your staging? Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, staging, you will see. It will be very interesting, but I can't tell everything, every detail.
Yeah. Would you like to? Yeah, I can say that. Back then, everything was very childish and playful. Now, this return does not feels like going backwards. It feels like moving forward with much more experience, responsibilities, personalities, and yeah, we want to do well, but we want to enjoy it and to share the love, share the happiness, and make this history very meaningful for us and for the audiences. Yeah.
Yes, after the winning Junior Eurovision, we had a dream to come back at the Eurovision Song Contest to represent our country one more time. So we are here and we're so happy to represent our song, our country, our energy, and yeah, to share the love, of course.
So it's real happening. It feels like dream finally come true.
It feels like an incredible honor for me to represent my country. My lovely Armenia, beautiful Armenia in Eurovision. Being on that big stage brings a lot of pride, as you know that millions of people are watching you, so you should do your best to represent your country as a best possible level. And it's also a huge responsibility because you are not only performing as an artist but also representing your country, your culture and your music. But that responsibility pushes you to give your best, stay focused and do your best for your country and for everyone.
A lot of proud contestants there, making sure they want to do their country proud. Well, Katie will provide us with more information later on across the week, so we'll keep you updated with everything Eurovision. Now let's take a quick break. When I return, we'll take a look at the regional headlines, and I'll be joined later by a guest to dig into some of those key stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's go to the stories in the region and we go over 1,000 kilometres to Turkey. The Queen of Belgium has arrived in Istanbul for high-level Belgian economic mission aimed at strengthening trade and investment ties with Turkey. The delegation includes senior Belgian officials and more than 400 business representatives taking part in meetings and investment forums in Istanbul and Ankara. Talks are expected to focus on sectors including defence, energy, aviation, logistics and technology. Funeral prayers have been held in northwestern Pakistan for police officers killed in a militant attack on a police security post. Authorities said the blast caused the post to collapse in Banu, with the bodies of 14 officers later recovered from the rubble. 3 surviving personnel were taken to hospital. A militant alliance known as Ittihad-ul-Mujahideen claimed responsibility for the attack. A Swedish media outlet says it has obtained a confidential Russian document allegedly detailing a campaign to influence Armenia's upcoming parliamentary elections and weaken Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan politically. According to Blank Spot, the document outlines plans to turn the vote into a public referendum on Pashinyan's leadership and prevent his political image from improving before the election. The report says the document does not identify a preferred opposition force, but describes methods aimed at shaping public opinion against the Armenian government. Now, Turkmenistan is set to host a high-level consultative meeting of Central Asian countries and Azerbaijan this October in the Awaza National Tourist Zone. Officials say preparations are already underway for the meetings of foreign ministers ahead of the Awaza summit, as well as the upcoming session of the Council of Heads of State of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Now we move over to Armenia, and Armenia President Nikol Pashinyan gave his address to his electorate describing the so-called Karabakh movement launched in 1988 as a fatal mistake. Alongside this, Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev issued a pointed warning that those who seek to harm Azerbaijan during the current election period would ultimately pay the price. Here to further discuss this is Nargiz Mammadova, an expert in international relations at Caspia Center here in Baku. Welcome this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
No problem. Well, my first question really is based on those statements I just read out in relation to Nikol Pashinyan saying that the 1988 agreement, what happened there was the launch in 1988 was a fatal mistake, and what President Ilham Aliyev has said in regards to any influence or any type of interference in the Armenian politics and lead up to the elections is something that he will definitely take seriously. Do you think it suggests that the leaderships in Baku and Yerevan share a certain logic regarding the future of the region?
I think that, first of all, these kind of statements made by Pashinyan and, all the issues related to the Karabakh separatist regime and etc., it all came again on the table of the media or of discussions in Armenia because of elections and pre-election dynamics in Armenia. And of course, that Nikol Pashinyan understood that the Karabakh is a part of Azerbaijan, and due to international law, this is a fact. So you cannot change international law, but what you can do is to explain to people of Armenia that the future of the South Caucasus is based on not in the ideas of war or ideas of separatism, which is still in the political playground in Armenia, but mostly about cooperation between Azerbaijan and Armenia, started from economic cooperation to cooperation between NGOs, between societies. But still, as I mentioned before, there are some people, I will say heroes in Armenia, who will think that, okay, let's take back all the things that already have been done in the normalization. Let's took another issue, which is regarding, the issue of separatists in Karabakh, and maybe this will be like trendy or hyped, and maybe it will change some dynamics in elections, which I think is also a very bad game.
And while meeting residents in Zangilan, President Aliyev strongly dismissed the EU monitoring mission on the Armenian side of the conditional border. He actually argued that the mission is unnecessary because Armenia has nothing to be protected from as far as Azerbaijan is concerned. What do you make of that particular statement?
After when the second Karabakh war ended, our side, like Azerbaijan's side, claimed that the war is over. What kind of other official statement does Armenia want to understand that really the war has ended, the conflict has ended, and it's time to go for normalization of the process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So this mission that on the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia, it's not actually between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's not actually the point that they view something or they're looking for something. No, they're maybe doing some underground works that it's not publicly vision, and maybe even they are cooperating closely with the intelligence services of Armenia. Maybe they are doing some other things that not the scope of the work of the mission of the of EU. And at the same time, before elections happened, we can see how EU really engaged politically, first of all, in the election dynamics, pre-election dynamics in Armenia, and even I will tell that, for example, there will be the second mission that will come to Armenia, maybe already they are there, that will observe the hybrid attacks or some hybrid, issues that can be like non-useful for or even make some political damage to elections. So the first thing that I'm gonna ask, I'm gonna ask, like, why Armenia is doing that? They are not. Why before elections Armenia needed this kind of mission for hybrid attacks or against hybrid attacks in Armenia? Are they like so weak to protect themselves, or are they so weak to understand that the only nation itself, the only government itself can choose your partner, your your vision to the future, or even the methods how to how to fight against hybrid attacks that can, for example, potentially come from Russia.
And Mrs. Mammadova, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, because I want to just make sure that I get as many questions in during the time that we have.
Of course.
I just also want to add another question to what you're explaining just now. The EU monitoring mission is expected to withdraw after the peace treaty is actually ratified, whereas the EU partnership mission inside Armenia is expected to remain. Do you think there's anything in the EU-Armenia connection that may not fully align with Azerbaijan's interests?
So I think that, first of all, even the existing right now, while the peace is like going on, let's say the peace negotiations are going on between Azerbaijan and Armenia, even the existence of this mission in the border, it's confusing. I don't think that's right. I don't think that is, it's not even logical. So if we discuss this situation in a wider perspective, we can understand that EU mission came there for some goal. And even maybe some of these goals are not very known even for Armenia. It can be, So, and I think that even now, Armenia should ask why we need this mission on the border, because we are doing peace. Armenia is not doing war with Azerbaijan. Now, right now, Armenia is doing peace. Armenia is doing some kind of trade with Azerbaijan, It's delivering the Azerbaijani oil to Armenia, or from the materials or the resources from other countries through Azerbaijan to Armenia. And I don't know why this EU mission is still there, because there's no logical explanation of their commitment to the peace negotiations. Like, the war is ended.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Prime Minister Pashinyan continues to present the 7th of June elections as a choice between peace and war. How important is that framing, do you think? And to what extent does it make the Azerbaijan-Armenian peace agenda a central issue in Armenia's domestic electoral contest?
Well, as I said, that Pashinyan and his team are understanding, happily, they are understanding that the prosperity of South Caucasus itself cannot be without the peace process and peace negotiations and peace existence of the peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So that's why, as Pashinyan is going and making speeches about, like, yes, the Karabakh war and what we have done before, it was mistake. Karabakh never belonged to Armenia, and at the same time there's still some powers, some figures, I will say, in political establishment of Armenia who is against Pashinyan, and of course they will bring the Karabakh topic from the contrary side to the political playground in Armenia. So I think that the elections in Armenia will be very interesting for experts, for analysts to understand who is prevailing, who is defending its logic or its ideas better, with which methods, who will support the separatist regime or who supports the separatist regime in...
Hello, Mrs. Mammadova, can you hear me? Oh, I think we've just lost you. I think there must have been a connection fault. Hopefully we can come back to you later on, but we'll go straight into our following story in relation to that. But it was great to have Nargis Mammadova talk about the Armenian upcoming elections, which is held for the 7th of June, which is just next month. Okay, now let's go over to the story that we were going to run in the relation to the continent of Africa and the impact the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is having due to the war in Iran, putting financial strain on South Africa in particular. Now, researchers are testing electric taxis designed specifically for markets in Africa. Let's take a look.
Researchers at South Africa's Stellenbosch University are working on a long-term solution to the country's dependence on oil imports. With most of the country's oil supply coming from abroad, South Africa remains vulnerable to global supply shocks.
So in the South African context, we can decarbonize our electrical system quite easily. And then if we can continue with that and e-mobility, then of course we can make a significant contribution towards reduction of CO2 emissions in the world.
One of the university's projects involves converting minibus taxis and other vehicles to run on electricity generated from South Africa's solar energy. Millions of people rely on minibus taxis for their daily commutes, while rising fuel prices continue to put pressure on both operators and passengers.
We're expecting a whole revolution of electric mobility, and what we do at this lab at Stellenbosch University, the Electric Mobility Lab, is to try to prepare for that. Everybody's aware of the petrol and diesel and oil price at the moment just because of the massive increases we've seen. If we can convert to electric mobility, we're actually going to generate our own electrons with our own solar energy.
The lab's converted electric taxi has already completed more than 5,000 kilometres of testing. The team has also applied the same concept to a personal vehicle, converting a VW Beetle to run entirely on electric power. The project comes at a time of global oil instability, with South Africa's taxi industry potentially becoming an important testing ground for electric mobility across Africa.
Very impressive. Let's see exactly how that is all put out in motion. Now let's take a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere. Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Gyane, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the morning headlines. Trump rejects Iran's response to US proposal to end the war as totally unacceptable. Evacuation flights leave Spain after hantavirus outbreak on luxury cruise ship. And Israeli strikes kill 3 people in Gaza, putting a test on the fragile ceasefire. Now let's head over to the press for the latest headlines making its way across the globe on a number of different websites. coronavirus this morning, and we head first to a news website in relation to what's going on in Russia. And Russia holds scaled back Victory Day parade, rejects prolonged ceasefire. Now, the latest news in relation to this is Vladimir Putin, who is Russia's leader, has suggested that Russia's war with Ukraine may be nearing an end. Now, he was speaking after a scaled back Victory Day parade in Moscow, where Putin said the conflict was coming to an end and again blamed Western support for Kyiv as security concerns reduced the usual military display there. Now, Putin says that he would only meet Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Ukraine's president, once a lasting peace deal is ready, with any talks in a third country reserved for the final stage of a signing of a long-term treaty. Now, we do have some extra information on this, which we will discuss later on in the programme, as there are talks in regards to whether or not US envoys will go over to Moscow to have further discussion on how to end the war in Ukraine. And it's something that Russia is also open to talks with the US in relation to that. But because of the Middle East crisis with the war in Iran, that's postponed a number of talks, peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. And hopefully the two countries are hoping that this will come back onto the main agenda. But that is a headline that is going around this morning. Now let's head over to our next website, which is going on CNN. And that's in relation to the hantavirus. Waves of passengers evacuated, cruise ship hit by deadly hantavirus. Now, this story has been bubbling over the course of the week when it was first reported, and the cruise ship passengers exposed to the hantavirus outbreak, showing symptoms while being repatriated to a number of countries, and one of those was France. So one of the passengers showed symptoms. We know that symptoms often arise 2 weeks after the virus has been contracted, so it takes quite a while before you know whether or not someone has contracted the virus. Now, the passenger has been placed in strict isolation as more than 90 tourists are repatriated from around the world, and 3 deaths have already been confirmed, and there have been 2 cases of the hantavirus. Now, just as a reminder as what the hantavirus is, it's a group of viruses which is normally carried by rodents and can be found in some areas across Europe, Africa and Asia. Now, the symptoms can include a fever, extreme fatigue, muscle aches and stomach pains, just to name a few of them, including shortness of breath. Now, we know that there is no currently widely available vaccine or specific antiviral treatment for the hantavirus, which is why a number of passengers who are showing signs are being making sure that they are in isolation during this time and always being monitored, just because of how the infection could spread. In some cases from person to person. But later on in the programme, I'll actually have a guest to go into more detail in relation to the hantavirus and what it actually means for governments across the world and how they actually have to cope with this, as a number of flights of passengers have been repatriated to their home countries. Now let's turn over to our next headline this morning, and that's sticking with our main and top story. The BBC is holding this story as well. Trump calls Iran's response to US proposal to end the war totally unacceptable. President Donald Trump rejected Iran's response to its proposal. Trump actually said it was something that he was not going to consider, and what it was is that Iran actually wanted an end to the fighting. They want a stop to the US naval blockade and any further attacks. Last week, Trump actually mentioned that he thinks that the war with Iran will end quite quickly. But since his last comments, we've seen that oil prices have shot right back up in relation to everything that's going on, especially now that the Strait of Hormuz is not opened, and crude oil is now back to just above $100 a barrel since the ceasefire came into effect on the 8th of April. But we have more information on this particular story in our report, so let's take a look at it now.
The latest attempt to end the conflict between Washington and Tehran has reached a deadlock. On Sunday, US President Donald Trump rejected a response from Iran delivered through Pakistani mediators, signaling that the current terms are insufficient for a US agreement. Writing on social media, the president stated he had reviewed the response from Iranian representatives and found it totally unacceptable. The Iranian proposal, as reported by state media, sought several key concessions in exchange for peace. Tehran is demanding full sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, the lifting of all US sanctions, and financial compensation for damages incurred during the recent escalation. Iranian sources, cited by the Tasnim news agency, claim their position is based on the rights of the Iranian people and suggest that the US proposal required what they termed submission to excessive demands. Adding to the complexity is the position of Israel. In an interview with CBS News, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized that any lasting deal must address Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Netanyahu stated that the war is not over as long as Iran possesses enriched uranium.
It accomplished a great deal, but it's not over because there's still nuclear material, enriched uranium, that has to be taken out of Iran. There's still enrichment sites that have to be dismantled. There's still proxies that Iran supports. There are ballistic missiles that they still want to produce. Now, we've degraded a lot of it, but all of that is still there, and there's work to be done.
The current situation follows military engagements in February, which led to a Pakistani-mediated ceasefire in April. While President Trump has extended this truce without a fixed deadline, a formal peace treaty has not been signed. Mediators in Pakistan continue to facilitate communication between the two sides, though no timeline for further talks has been established.
Now let's turn to the war in Ukraine, and Russian President Vladimir Putin says the conflict in Ukraine could be nearing an end, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signals Kyiv's openness to direct talks. Let's take a look at the story.
War in Ukraine remains active despite renewed diplomatic signals and a temporary ceasefire between Moscow and Kyiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the conflict in Ukraine could be coming to an end, while signaling openness to talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky aimed at reaching a long-term peace agreement. Speaking to reporters in Moscow after Russia's Victory Day celebrations, Putin accused Western countries of fueling the war through NATO expansion and continued military support for Kyiv. He said Russia would be prepared to meet with Zelensky either in Moscow or in a third country, but only if discussions are focused on finalizing a lasting peace deal. Putin also said Russia had proposed a prisoner exchange involving 500 captives even before US President Donald Trump suggested broader ceasefire efforts, adding that Moscow had not yet received a response from Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine later agreed to a larger 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap as part of a 3-day ceasefire running through Monday. Despite the ceasefire, both sides accused each other of continued attacks. Russia's defense ministry claimed Ukrainian forces carried out thousands of ceasefire violations, including drone strikes and shelling. Ukraine, meanwhile, said Russian troops continued assaults along key frontline areas. Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia had refrained from large-scale missile and air attacks, but was still carrying out combat operations near the front line.
In other words, the Russian army is not observing the silence at the front and is not even particularly trying to. All our Ukrainian units are acting in a mirror-like manner, defending our positions exactly as required.
Zelensky also confirmed preparations for the planned prisoner exchange and said the United States was involved in guaranteeing implementation of the agreement.
Now, US President Donald Trump said 5 prisoners from Poland and Moldova have been released from detention in Belarus and Russia following diplomatic efforts led by his administration. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said the releases were secured with the help of Special Envoy, crediting coordinated talks with several countries. He also thanked Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko for his cooperation, calling the development a result of US-led engagement efforts. Now, the Kremlin says US envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner could travel to Russia for further talks on the war in Ukraine. Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov said Moscow and Washington remain in regular contact by phone, despite the US currently focusing more on the Middle East crisis. Ushakov also said negotiations would remain stalled unless Ukrainian forces withdraw from Donbas region. Now, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is under mounting pressure after Labour suffered its worst local election results in over 30 years earlier this week. Well, earlier last week. Significant losses to Reform UK, which left him facing renewed calls to quit. Starmer insists he will continue with what he calls a 10-year project for national renewal. He is also set to deliver a key speech on Monday aimed at resetting his leadership and promising bolder action on Britain's major challenges. He also plans to push for closer ties with the EU to strengthen the UK's economy, trade and defence. An international evacuation operation is underway following the hantavirus outbreak. Passengers and crew from more than 20 countries are now being flown home from Spain for quarantine and monitoring as health officials work to contain the spread of the virus.
Dozens of passengers and crew members have begun leaving the MV Hondius cruise ship docked off Tenerife following a hantavirus outbreak that has killed 3 people and infected several others. The vessel arrived in the Canary Islands carrying more than 140 people from 23 countries after spending days stranded off Cape Verde. Spanish authorities launched a large international evacuation effort with charter and government flights transporting passengers to countries including the United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, Turkey, Canada and the United States. British passengers were transferred to Arrow Park Hospital near Liverpool for an initial isolation period, while other countries introduced their own quarantine and testing measures. Spanish Health Minister Monica Garcia said nearly 100 passengers from 19 nationalities had already disembarked by Sunday evening. French authorities also confirmed that 1 passenger developed symptoms during a repatriation flight to Paris and was taken to hospital for testing. Officials say the outbreak involves the Andes strain of hantavirus, a rodent-borne virus found in parts of South America, and one of the few strains capable of limited person-to-person transmission. The World Health Organization has sought to calm fears of a wider outbreak, stressing that hantavirus does not spread in the same way as COVID-19.
This is not COVID. The average person does not need to be worried about hantavirus here in this setting. These folks are being managed very carefully, very deliberately by the Spanish authorities. They're getting off the ship, they're getting into small boats, they're being spaced apart in the buses so that there's no risk to one another, even if one were to become symptomatic. We know that none of them are symptomatic as they have been leaving the ship. They're going straight to their aircraft and they're being taken to their respective national jurisdictions.
The WHO says passengers were screened before disembarkation and transferred in controlled groups for repatriation flights to their home countries. Officials say international contact tracing and monitoring will continue throughout the incubation period, which can last up to 8 weeks. While authorities say the overall public risk remains low, contingency plans remain in place in case additional infections emerge after passengers return home.
Now, staying on this topic and to dive more deeper into this is pharmacist and health commentator Thorin Govind, who's here to kind of discuss exactly what this all means. Welcome to the programme this morning.
Morning. It is a complicated event for us to be dealing with in terms of a cruise ship with people from nationalities from all over the world and trying to safely get them back home and manage this. So I think the authorities have got quite a challenge ahead of them still.
Definitely. So let's just start with what's the latest that's going on. We know that 3 people have unfortunately died from this virus, with passengers now returning home, repatriated to their countries. How concerned should governments be then to contain this particular outbreak?
Well, the risk to the general public is low, but as we know, we're hearing that this is the Andes strain of the hantavirus. It's rare, but this is a strain where there is known to be human to transmission, which poses a challenge, but it's very close contact between humans. So they're going to have to manage, obviously, moving those passengers to their respective countries, which is a challenge. But the World Health Organization have recommended, not that it's mandatory, but they have recommended that people quarantine for 42 days and that there be active follow-up, which does, of course, put a challenge on and pressure on those respective governments.
Definitely, and those 42 days it's longer than a month that the passenger has to make sure they stay quarantined for, which has financial implications maybe for them. They're not able to go to work or have to work from home, whatever the case may be. Is that to also make sure that if they have any symptoms, that it comes up during that time of quarantine and staying away, because we know that this virus shows up quite later on after a passenger or someone has been infected?
So we know the incubation period is up to 6 weeks. What we also have to consider here is there's no it's not mandatory, but the different countries are managing the situation slightly differently. Now, they will either be in a facility run by the government, or they will be isolating at home. But there has been a different approach that we're seeing from the authorities in different countries. So in the UK, for example, as you say, we know they are going to be at Arrow Park Hospital. For those of us here in the UK, during COVID, there was a lot of the scenes that we are seeing now, but this is absolutely not a COVID situation.
Yes, which is something that a lot of people are kind of putting it towards, like, is it going to be the same as what happened during the COVID virus period of time? But a lot of analysts and experts have said, no, it's not like that. It's very far from it, which is fine. But there is a lot of speculation onto where this virus was actually first picked up from, and a lot of fingers are pointing now to Argentina. Is it important that we find out where the origin of this virus was located, or should we focus more on helping passengers to recover?
Well, I think it's a mix of both. We also know that they'll be disinfecting and cleaning that ship appropriately as well. As you say, they are looking at Argentina to see where this virus was first picked up from. But it's that managing for the future and trying to also make sure people are aware of how this spreads and as you've already said already, it is from the aerosolized droplets from rodent feces and urine. I think generally public health is always something that's evolving and moving, and when we're globally working, it's always a challenge to make sure people are educated, and there's a lot of misinformation out there as well, which is really important that we tackle.
Yes, which is one of the things. Misinformation seems to run further than the truth, so it's always catching up on that. But just on the hantavirus symptoms, we know, as you mentioned, it takes up to 6 weeks sometimes to see any type of symptom in regards to the virus. Could we be looking at further cases then of people showing this particular hantavirus symptoms coming up, do you think?
Potentially. Now, early on, it starts off with a fever, fatigue, muscle aches, and then that can develop into issues with the lungs and respiratory failure. And it can happen quite quickly. And we know that the Andes strain is a high mortality rate as well. So I think that's why it's so important that these individuals and any close contacts are being monitored.
Yes. And just on, I guess, the cruise ship that it happened on board, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Recently, there was also, this month actually, there was the norovirus outbreak aboard a Caribbean Princess ship as well. How common are viruses on board cruise ships or in enclosed environments? Is that an environmental thing, or are we looking beyond the fact that it's a cruise ship? I'm just trying to connect the dots. Are cruise ships now one of those places that actually viruses can spread quite quickly?
I wouldn't stop going on a cruise because of this. I think we need to consider that, you know, in our home environment, there's maybe plenty of ventilation. It's a very different environment to being on an enclosed ship or vessel or aeroplane with other people. I think we just need to all think about our own health when we go out as well. If we're not feeling too well, we also need to consider other people and how the impact on them as well. So I don't think this should stop us traveling. I think it's a wonderful thing to do, to be able to go out and explore the world. But as with anything, there are risks, and that's why it's really important you also think about your travel insurance. You make sure you've got the appropriate vaccinations when you travel. Lots of things to consider, not just your wonderful holiday when you travel.
No, definitely. I'm sure this will come into many people's minds when they are booking their next trip. And just on the hantavirus, we know there's no particular cure or anti-virus kind of supplements to take. Why is that? Why is there nothing to actually tackle this particular virus?
Well, it's always a challenge. What we're lucky in this case, I say lucky, is we are aware of it. We have dealt with it before. It's not like when we were dealing with COVID and it was everything having to be looked into very rapidly. But it is always a challenge when we're dealing with new situations. And even on a cruise ship, you know, it's a situation we might not have had to deal with before in terms of people knowing about this. So it's hard to say exactly why we've not got something for this, because it's always a challenge. Global health, we're always trying to find and investigate new things, but I think the focus now is on how we keep an eye on these patients right now.
No, definitely so. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the programme, Ms. Govind, in relation to your thoughts and understandings in relation to the hantavirus. Thank you again. Now we move over to the Middle East, and Israeli airstrikes have again hit several locations across Gaza, resulting in multiple casualties and prompting fresh claims and counterclaims from both sides, despite a US brokered ceasefire that remains under heavy strain.
Israeli strikes killed at least 3 Palestinians in Gaza on Sunday, including 2 Hamas-run police officers, according to health officials, in the midst of ongoing tensions despite a US brokered ceasefire. Medics said another strike on the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza killed 1 person and wounded 2 others. The Israeli military said it had targeted 2 suspected militants approaching its forces. Separately, Palestinians in southern Gaza gathered around a wrecked vehicle after an Israeli airstrike hit Khan Yunis, killing the head of the city's criminal police force and his assistant, according to Gaza's Hamas-run Interior Ministry. The officials were identified as Wessam Abdel Hadi and his aide.
The fragile ceasefire the world thinks is in effect in the Gaza Strip. However, daily there is a repeated targeting and cowardly assassination incidents against our people in general. Since the start of this ceasefire, the strikes are still ongoing. Every day we lose children, we lose elders, we lose young people.
Later in the day, mourners carried the bodies of the 2 officers through the streets of Khan Yunis as grieving relatives and residents gathered to pay their final respects.
The police personnel are civilian members who serve the people, resolve problems between people, intervene to settle conflicts between people, but the occupation continues to target them.
The Israeli military said it struck Hamas elite fighters in southern Gaza, alleging they were preparing imminent attacks on its forces. The latest violence has once again exposed the fragility of the ceasefire that came into force in October 2025. Despite the agreement, strikes and clashes have continued across Gaza, with both Israel and Hamas accusing each other of violating the truce. According to local medics, at least 850 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire began. Israel says 4 of its soldiers have also been killed during the same period. Gaza health authorities say more than 72,500 Palestinians have been killed since the war erupted in October 2023, with civilians accounting for the majority of the deaths.
Staying in the Middle East, and Hezbollah has launched attacks against Israeli forces as deadly strikes across Lebanon kill at least 21 people, pushing the fragile ceasefire to the brink of collapse. The group claims its drones and missiles targeted Israeli command centers in response to truce violations. Meanwhile, Lebanese health officials report children are among the victims of the latest Israeli bombardment. The Israeli military says it intercepted several hostile targets, accusing Hezbollah of breaching the agreement. Now over to East Africa, and Kenyan President William Ruto and French President Emmanuel Macron have held talks in Nairobi during a state visit ahead of the Africa-France summit, which starts later today. Ruto said it is the first time the summit is to be held outside France or Francophone Africa, with Kenya positioning itself as a hub for renewed ties with Paris. Talks centered on trade, investment, climate and security as France seeks to reset ties with African partners amid shifting global influence.
And a photo. Monsieur le Président.
You see.
You're watching Daybreak on A News. Just taking a short break. Make sure you stay with us for further updates and for our tech implementation segment. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Gyane. Now let's turn to the world of technology. And Apple has offered to pay $250 million to settle a lawsuit claiming it failed to deliver AI features it advertised in 2024. Here's A News reporter Nathan Kamanga with more on our tech show, Switch.
How much do you think a promise is worth? Maybe $250 million? Well, that's exactly what Apple has agreed to pay in a settlement after failing to deliver on a promise it made back in 2024 when it advertised new AI features for its voice assistant Siri, features that still have not been released. The tech giant was taken to court in a lawsuit that claimed it misled the market in order to boost iPhone sales. Now, just before you start thinking you've been made a millionaire by the settlement, it's worth noting that the terms cover every iPhone 16 variant, along with the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max purchased in the United States. That's roughly 37 million devices, and each qualifying device will get a starting payout of $25. But hey, if you really want to make millions, I'll have an offer for you towards the end of the show. Just stick around. Now imagine this. You're a little lost at a railway station and need help finding your way. Suddenly, this guy shows up to assist you. That's the reality of passengers at China's Shanghai South Railway Station, where a team of robots helps answer basic inquiries and guide travelers. The station says it plans to deepen its collaboration with the high-tech sector and explore even more ways to integrate AI into passenger services. When they're off duty, the robots can even put on a show. Just don't get too distracted, you might miss your train. Now, remember in the first story when you thought you'd become a millionaire? Well, here's a real opportunity. Google is offering to pay up to $1.5 million to anyone who can discover critical vulnerabilities in its Pixel smartphones. The phones in question are the latest ones with the Titan M security chips. This initiative highlights how seriously major tech companies are beginning to take user security. Researchers are also required to follow official disclosure channels, just to ensure that flaws are addressed before they can be exploited by malicious actors. So maybe you can become a millionaire after all, you just gotta work for it first. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to join us for more tech news and insights on the next show.
Those little robots look very cool, but at the same time, my gosh, I'll be mesmerized by how they perform and how they act, even with his little red hats. Very odd, very strange, but still very interesting. The Tech News Show comes back next week, Monday, so make sure you continue to stay watching A News for more information. Now let's go over to France, and the official poster for the 79th Cannes Film Festival has been unveiled on the facade of the Palais des Festivals in Cannes as preparations continue ahead of this year's event. Workers installed this large poster on Sunday, days before the festival officially opens on the 12th of May. Organisers say that this year's artwork pays tribute to the iconic film Thelma and Louise. The festival will run through to the 23rd of May, with South Korean filmmaker Park Chan-wook serving as jury president. And if you're young enough or old enough to remember Thelma and Louise, you'll remember that it was quite an iconic film. I will not give away the ending. Well, that was all the news for this morning. Thank you for joining me on Daybreak today. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for further updates throughout the course of the day. Have a lovely morning.